osobą powszechnie znaną, so they are well known to our guests as they arrived in such a big... Więc, proszę Państwa, bardzo się cieszymy, że profesor przyjął zaproszenie na ten wykład. Chciałam złożyć podziękowanie Stowarzyszeniu Żydowski Instytut Historyczny za to, że wspomógł nas w organizacji tego wykładu. I ponieważ wykład będzie bardzo ciekawy, ale długi, chciałam przekazać już głos profesorowi, który... Aha, przepraszam, jeszcze pani Małgorzacie Stolarskiej-Cron, która...
Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie w imieniu Muzeum Historii Żydów Polskich. 1,5 miesiąca temu przy okazji obchodów 70. rocznicy powstania w Getcie Warszawskim oraz otwierając po raz pierwszy przed Państwem podwoje naszego muzeum, profesor Samuel Kassow wygłosił wykład codziennej życia w Getcie Warszawskim na przykładzie archiwum Emanuela Ringelbluma. To była fascynująca opowieść o ludziach, którzy z narażeniem życia ratowali pamięć historyczną o próbach przetrwania w nieludzkiej i okrutnej rzeczywistości w Getcie Warszawskim. Dzisiaj mamy ogromny zaszczyt gościć u nas profesora Philipa Zimbardo, który jest wybitnym specjalistą z zakresu badań nad mechanizmami zła. Państwu zapewne znany jest słynny stanfordzki eksperyment więzienny, przy którym profesor wykazał, że zło owszem może być częścią natury ludzkiej, ale wyzwala się ono w określonych sytuacjach. To jest oczywiście opisane w książce Efekt Cyfera, która została przetłumaczona w 2008 roku i wydana nakładem PWN. W swoim najnowszym projekcie profesor stara się dowieść, że tak jak zło może być częścią natury ludzkiej, tak samo odruchy bohaterstwa tkwią w każdym z nas. I to jest częścią jego najnowszego projektu Heroic Imagination projekt wyobraźni heroicznej. Dobro i zło, bohaterstwo i okrucieństwo to część narracji zagłady. W swoim dzisiejszym wykładzie, który profesor przygotował specjalnie dla naszego muzeum i po raz pierwszy w nim wygłosi, pokaże, że w jaki sposób i czy historia Holokaustu i historia, zwłaszcza powstania w Getcie Warszawskim, może mieć wpływ na współczesne zachowania. Czy bohater tkwi w każdym z nas? A jeśli tak, to co i jak może tego bohatera w nas wyzwolić? Zapraszam Państwa na wykład profesora Zimbardo, lekcje wyniesione z powstania w Getcie Warszawskim, a nowe pokolenie polskich bohaterów.
It is wonderful for me to be here in Warsaw again. I have prepared a special lecture for this special museum on the special topic of what are the lessons that we can translate that are learned from the Warsaw Ghetto rebellion and uprising, to transform them in how do we use those lessons in creating a new generation of youthful Polish heroes. So, again, what's exciting about this museum compared to other museums about Jewish people focus only on the Holocaust. What's exciting about this museum, it focuses on the life and contributions of Polish Jews in the good times before the Nazi Holocaust killed 90% of them. Oops, one more there. Take a while. And this museum is stunningly beautiful. It's really unique in the world. So, and I think because of the beautiful architecture, it will attract people, young people to come for many, many years to come. Part of presenting the life of Polish Jews is the contributions that Polish American Jews made in the 1920s and 30s, where they went from Poland to America, some had good careers, came back to visit family, and took pictures. Early a 16mm film and a regular camera film, showing the life of Jewish people in Poland, in Warsaw, in that wonderful period before the war. So my talk will be in 3 acts. Act 1 is on the glorious history of the long relationship between Poland and the United States of America. This is an unusual photo I discovered of our President Roosevelt welcoming the Polish delegation to Washington immediately after World War II. And so this reaffirmed the relationship between America and Poland. And since then, I think we have been the best of allies between us. In Act 1, in Act 2, we deal with evil of many, many kinds. I will present, if we're talking about evil, evil is ugly. So I'm going to present some terrible images. I must warn you in advance, you could look away if you want, if you don't want to see them. Many Polish people think about America in very glowing terms. Wonderful country. But like every nation in the world, Americans have done terrible things to other Americans. And so I will show you some images of American white people who killed black people for 100 years. Not just killed them, tortured them, lynched them, hanging, and burned them alive. Even worse, they would announce on Sunday in the park, we will kill black people. And whole families would come to watch, and they would take pictures. And they would send the pictures to friends who couldn't come on postcards. And those postcard pictures of lynchings and burnings became the start of the postcard industry in America. That is, the American Postal Service sent those pictures out. And so what you see is not only the ugliness of white citizens breaking the law. That is, it's not that they were tried and sentenced to death. They were just killed because of some false belief that they raped a woman or something. But you will see women killed, children killed because they were black. In America, during the Second World War, we sent 110,000 Japanese American citizens. They were citizens of the United States, many of whom were born in America. We sent them to concentration camps for 4 years throughout the whole war. And I will show you pictures of what that was like. It was not like your concentration camps because we called it detention center. So a lot of evil is about the semantics. It was not detention centers, as you'll see. Armed guards, barricades, barbed wire, forced to do, you had no choice. And just like the Jews in Warsaw, they had to sell their property, give up their jobs, forced to go on transports to remote, horrible places in America, and they had to be there for 4 years. Then we will turn our attention to how do psychologists like me, social psychologists, try to understand evil. And what we try to do is show how is it possible to transform good, ordinary people, college students, average Americans, into people who could become perpetrators of evil, harm or hurt others. And I will present 2 famous experiments, one by Stanley Milgram on blind obedience to authority. And he was a Jew. We were friends. We were in the same class in high school, and he worried, could he and his family be sent to concentration camp? And people said, no, we're Americans, we're not Nazis. He said, how do you know unless you're in the situation? Then people said, we're not that kind of people. He said, I would bet if you were in Berlin, 1935, before the war, you would say, we're not that kind of people, we wouldn't do it. So he said is, you do not know what you would do in a new situation until you're in the situation. So what he does is he creates situations to put good people in, and someone in authority tells them to do a bad thing. And then we will present my Stanford prison experiment in which, in my analysis, it's rare that someone says, do something bad. More often, you're in a system. You're in a school. You're in a prison. You're in a mental hospital. You're in a setting. You're in a family where no one says to do anything bad, but other people are doing bad things. And they put pressure on you in the group to follow the rules. Or you have a role to play. Your job is you're a prison guard, or you're a superintendent of a mental hospital. So what I try to do is say, how does a situation with embedded in the system corrupt good people? Act 3 is hopefully after I depress you, in Act 3 we have something positive. So I want us to consider what I call the banality of heroism, how anyone could become a hero. And especially we want to focus on how can we create a new Poland where we encourage the youth to be heroes, new heroes. And I will tell you, it's a difficult problem given, in quote, the old personality of Polish people and the Nazi occupation, the consequences of the Soviet occupation. So those are our 3 acts. So very quick, Act 1. Okay, back. So, when I was a student, little student, there were these 2 Polish generals who fought in 1776 in the American Revolutionary War, where American pioneers, little country, fighting against the British Empire. Impossible. And General Casimir Pulaski came to help us fight. And he was somebody who was promoter of human rights, and he fought vigorously. And it's hard to, in America, October 11th is Pulaski Day. It's a memorial holiday. October 12th is Columbus Day. So to this day, hundreds of years later, we still honor him. This is General, we say Kosciuszko. Again, fought in the war. Funny outfit. And now there are many streets in America, a famous highway named after him. So hundreds of years later, Polish heroes are still honored in America. One more. Since then, Polish Americans have had a big influence on America. There are more than 10 million Polish people, many generations, living in America, making contributions as writers, poets, dramatists, businessmen, in education and science. And here are some banners from different parts of America honoring Polish Day and so forth. And recently, here's our President Obama, with your president, reaffirming the political ties between our country and your country, that we should always be allied against any kind of totalitarianism, fascism, communism, anything that diminishes human dignity. Many, many Americans, 50%, are so happy that we got rid of George Bush and Dick Cheney, who really for us represented totalitarianism compared to Obama. He is a new Polish-American hero. Last year, in America, as a consequence of global warming, for the first time ever, there was a huge storm on the East Coast in New York. And New York was flooded. New York City, like we see today in Prague, even worse. There was huge flooding, and this Polish-American, Artur Kasprzak, hard to say, he died. He went into a place where his family were drowning, and he would take one out, go back, went 6 times, saved the whole family, and died. And so he was seen as a hero by the Polish government as well as the American government. So old heroes, new heroes. The problem with Poland, with Warsaw, is unfortunately you're between Berlin and Moscow. So geographical centrality, you're stuck like in a vice. And so this has been a curse, not only recent years, but for more than 100 years. The good thing about America is it's always been isolated. We have Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and it was not until September 11, 2001, that Americans first perceived they could be attacked by terrorists, by people from foreign countries. And because of that, for the first time, Americans felt fear and vulnerability. One more. Okay. Okay. But now there's really a new Poland. I've been coming to Poland for 20 years. And almost every year, there's a slight change, for me, more and more positive, that there's a new vibrancy. I'm going to argue later, one of the problems from American perspective is Polish people are too cynical, too pessimistic, can be done, and I will listen. And we're trying to promote optimism. But now, you go to Krakow, it's majestic. You go to Wrocław, I say lyrical. And then in Warsaw, it's more and more cosmopolitan, more and more elegant. And these are the current pictures of Polish Jews living a good life, living the good life. So Act 2, we're going to look at evil. And this is a famous illustration by the Dutch artist M.C. Escher. Okay? So take a minute to look at it. And I would like you to now, whoops, too soon, to come back. Focus on the white. And the black is the background. When you do that, the world is filled with angels. Little angels in tutus, happy, singing, dancing. But now we're going to look more deeply. And you focus on the black, and the world is filled with demons. What does that tell us? It says the world will always be filled with good and evil, with devils and angels, heroes and monsters. And part of it is our mental construction of reality. So what is evil? It's okay. So there are many definitions of evil. A psychological definition is evil is about power. It's about the exercise of power to intentionally harm people psychologically through prejudice, to harm people physically through torture, through discrimination, to harm people by killing them in various ways. But most evil is not done by people. Most evil is done by governments, by systems. And that's committing crimes against humanity. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So in my Lucifer Effect book that some of you have, I will be happy to sign later and take photos, I tried to apply the lessons of the prison study to understand the abuses of American prison guards in Iraq, in a prison known as Abu Ghraib. And so I became an expert witness for one of the guards, so I got to know everything about him, the situation, and then the system that created this terrible place. It was very much like the Stanford Prison study, only much, much worse. And so I began to see, when we try to understand complex behavior, in this case, evil behavior, we really have to analyze behavior at three levels. One, at the level of the person. We call it dispositional. What does the person bring into the situation? What are their personality traits? What is their background? What is their religion? What is their culture? What is their gender? Sadly, most psychologists around the world end there, as if that was the finish. Social psychologists come along and say, individuals are always in a social context. Just like that. So I am not, imagine I'm on a stage and there's no audience, there's no microphone, I'm just talking to myself. You know? Pazzo. But there's always an audience. You're always playing a role. You're always in a costume. So social psychologists say we have to understand the individual in the social context, in the circumstances. But then when I study Abu Ghraib, I say, wait a minute, who created that situation? So that's where real power is. So that's the system. Political, economic, cultural, legal. And usually it's hidden. So when the situation is really powerful and evil, it's disguised. We don't know, it's infiltrated. So I'm a Sicilian, my family. I just came back from Sicily, and there's many campaigns against the mafia. You could never, mafia is no longer a person. Mafia is infiltrated in the police, in the business, in the government. So mafia now mafia does ordinary business. Only they, at one level, at some other level, it's corrupt. So again, we have to understand the person in the situation in the system. Wait, no, I get it. Small. I have to point it out. The other way around, or that's right. Little rehearsal for the translators. Okay, so dispositional evil, we start very quickly. So here are pictures of Hitler, Stalin, Osama bin Laden, Idi Amin. Recently in Norway, in Oslo, this man, Andres Breivik, handsome young man, went in a summer camp where children were swimming, and with a high-powered rifle began to kill them. Killed 69, injured many others. Why? He says, I'm a laid-back kind of guy, meaning I'm a calm guy. My friends say I would not hurt a fly, but he killed 69 children. He said, but I did it to protest my government's acceptance of Islam. He said he was against Muslims, he was against Islam, and he said my government is social Christian, and he and his friends do not respect Islam. And so what he was going to do is kill people, children of parents who belonged in the government. So for me, this is dispositional evil. Here's an unusual case of systemic evil. Because then the last part I will talk about the researchers is situational evil. In China, one of America's most vibrant allies, economic allies, every year Chinese government kills 1 million men. It's alarming, no? How do they do it? They encourage men to smoke, not women. So smoking is masculine. 54% of all Chinese men smoke 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day. Only 2% of women, okay? Which is low compared to almost every other nation. Why did they do it? The Chinese government owns the tobacco monopoly. The Chinese government makes 605 billion yen every year, more than any other business. In addition, they control the media, so they do not allow anti-smoking campaigns. And in fact, they use their money to build schools. One of the schools is called the Sichuan Tobacco School. And on this, there's a poster, unfortunately I don't have the Chinese, it says, diligence is important in school, but tobacco will help you succeed. So here's propaganda that the government promotes in a school it owns in order to get children to think about it's good to smoke because you will succeed if you smoke, rather than if you smoke you will die of cancer. And that's what we say they killed. What we know is if there's 320 million Chinese men in China and 54% smoke, that means 1 million we know will get lung cancer every year and 1 million will die. But there's other kinds of systemic evil. War is obviously the worst. Poverty is an evil. Poverty is growing throughout the world. Slave labor, sex trafficking. And there's another kind of evil. So there's the evil of action, where you do something that you know is harmful. The other kind of evil is the evil of doing nothing when you should be doing something. So right now, around the world, most governments are doing nothing about the increasingly negative effects of climate change. So the hurricane, the storm in New York is just the beginning. Around the world, climate is changing in ways that it's never been. In the middle of America, they have a drought. For 3 years, it has not rained. All of the crops are dying. Okay. In other places, they're having tornadoes, hurricanes, worse than ever. And the big problem, they expect the oceans to rise 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 inches. That will wipe out many islands around the world. And no government is doing anything seriously about it, especially not American government. This is where I grew up. I grew up in a ghetto in the South Bronx of New York City. New York City, most vibrant city in the world. This is where poor people lived. Then, in the 1930s. When you grow up in poor, in any ghetto in the world, you are surrounded by people, men, whose job it is to corrupt children, to take drugs, to sell drugs, to steal for them. If you're a girl, to sell her body in prostitution. That's their job. They don't see it as evil, it's their job. It's how they make money. The other thing that's missing from this picture, you don't see a tree. There's no flowers, there's no grass. And if you grow up in this neighborhood, you never imagine that the world should be filled with grass and trees and flowers. So you grow up with concrete and steel, which really prepares you for when you go to prison with concrete and steel and there's never nature. Sex trafficking is now the most profitable business in the world. It used to be drug trafficking. Many of the drug traffickers have switched. The reason is, and now we know from the UN, at least 600,000 women and children are sex slaves in almost every country of the world. Why do you say profitable? You only need $2,000 to feed and clothe a sex slave for 1 year. For each sex slave, they make $30,000 in profits that men pay money to have sex with them. 30,000 times 600,000 is $180 billion every year, guaranteed. So many people used to sell drugs, do this. For them, it's much easier. Around the world, it is estimated by the UN at least 25 million people live in slave labor. Whole families in some countries, throughout India, Bangladesh, other places, doing horrible jobs, working 12, 15, 20 hours a day, terrible food, terrible conditions. And it's getting worse rather than getting better. Poverty is the driver. So if you're poor, you have to work at any job available. But human greed is the managers of those companies that is the navigator. Right. Okay, so now quickly, as I mentioned before, let's look at two kinds of evil that my country practiced. Fortunately, it's over, but there's a message for everybody in the world about how could a democratic country allow this to happen? So, as I said, for 100 years, in 22 states, not just one place, in a large part of America, white citizen mobs would accuse a black man, or many black men, or somebody else, of doing something which was threatening to white people. And sometimes they were put in jail, but then they took them out of jail to kill them publicly. And so I'm going to show you pictures of the postcards that were taken. Again, what I'd like you to look at is the people posing for the postcard, whole families, little children, boys and girls. And imagine your mother or father, you're going to bring your child to see somebody burning alive or hanging. Okay? And then I'm going to show you pictures of how America imprisoned 110,000 Japanese citizens. So again, these are horrible. As I said, you could look away if you want. Little girls. Burning alive. So again, it's so hard to imagine anything like that could happen anywhere. You say, no, this is in America. This isn't democracy. And it was until 30 or 40 years ago. It's not like 1600, 1800. And then, when Japan invaded the United States, there was great fear that the Japanese would invade America, and they were afraid that Japanese Americans would be spies. And so the President of the United States, Roosevelt, working with the generals, said, okay, we have to put all Japanese Americans in concentration camps in remote areas so they could never, no phone, they could never communicate. And so this is what it looked like. A sign was put up, notice all Japanese Americans, you have 1 month, sell your business, sell your furniture, come to an appointed place with 1 suitcase, and then we will process you. Think of it very much like many countries deporting Jews. But then, after the sign, said, no Japs wanted. So people putting signs on the business. So many times they had to sell their business, and Japanese were very prosperous in many business. They had to sell their business at almost very low price. And then it says, Japs keep moving. This is a white neighborhood. These are American citizens, not immigrants, American citizens. So here now people put up. So again, I see really interesting parallels with what happened in Warsaw, with lots of people who knew what was happening in the ghetto and not only didn't care, thought it was a good idea. So here, 110,000 in San Francisco, Los Angeles, all over, lined up. So here, soldiers with guns, put them in trains, transports, just like the deportation. They didn't go to death camps. But they went to this. These were always in the desert, in the worst place, in the mountains, where you had no access. People could not easily come to see you. And you lived in one room, whole family. These are people who had whole houses, had farms. Many Japanese were great farmers. They owned vineyards. You were forced to live for 4 years in one room. Okay. Now, in America, we called it internment camp, detention center. No, concentration camp. And so the lesson is, this could happen anywhere. So if I say, this is a stain on the fabric of American democracy. This is a black mark on American democracy. And the underlying principle is dehumanization. Thinking about other human beings as the other, as different, as not human. So these are blacks. These are Chinese. who are different from you. And then secondly, irrational fear that black people, black men, there was always a fear black men are too sexual. So it's white men that say they are the enemy. And in the war, the fear was Japanese would conquer America, which didn't make sense, really. If you think about it, Japan is there, America is so far away. But then systemic injustice. It was the President of the United States that signed the order to say, okay, all Japanese have to go to detention centers. So these are three processes that, again, were evident to me in the Holocaust. So now I want to just show some pictures that are relevant to your museum. I was fortunate recently in America to be a guest of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It was the 20th anniversary of this museum. It was the first of its kind. There are some now in Los Angeles, I think New York and Chicago. So I gave lectures about the psychology of the Holocaust. And so in the museum, I want to show you some interesting, a new exhibit that is relevant to the new exhibit which is being developed here. So the first room you go into said, some were neighbors. Some Jews were your neighbors. They lived next to you for years, you know. However, who collaborated with the Nazis, who were in complicity, who helped them in the Holocaust? So here's a picture of the Warsaw Ghetto. You know, people have no idea. Right? They think it's it's a few blocks. It was 100 square blocks, 400,000 people were put there, you know, for several years. So people around the world have no idea. When they say Warsaw Ghetto, again, they think they put some Jews in a little place. So some people were true, they believed what Hitler had said. Hitler was God, Hitler was the Führer, they believed what he said. Other people were opportunistic. They could use this to take over Jewish business, take over Jewish apartments or houses. Other people, they say, were conformists. They didn't believe what Hitler said, but they went along. They didn't want to be different. These are Jews and Poles. And there were very few resistors. For every person who resisted, there were 1,000 who went along. Okay, one more. So, what's critical in all of this, and what I'll show you, is the role of propaganda. That you prepare people to hate by changing the way they think about others, okay? And that's the use of government propaganda. And so here's a sign in Warsaw. Jews are our misfortune. Because Jews exist, we, the rest of people, Polish Catholics and Germans, people around the world, suffer because Jews are the misfortune of nature. And here's a picture of Ukrainian soldiers, Russian soldiers, who the Nazis put in prison, and then the Nazis realized they didn't have enough men to deal with the Jewish question, so they let them out of prison if they would help the Nazis, and they did. And here's pictures of the Ukrainian soldiers point blank killing Jews. And so in every nation, there were always collaborators, people who, whether they believed that Jews were inferior, it didn't matter. Their life was made easier by doing what the Germans wanted them to do. Some people said, I was just doing my job. It was my job to do this. I didn't ask any questions. I did my job the way I was supposed to. And other people said, should I take the risk to help? It was a risk. In the extreme, if you were caught hiding Jews or helping Jews, you could die. So people say it's too big a risk. And so what is amazing, the heroes who did take that risk. Okay? So again, heroes are people who take a risk, a personal threat to their life, to help other people. For me, this is one of the saddest pictures, although it doesn't look. So again, Jews were forced to wear a star, okay? So this is a girl in the ghetto, probably going to a birthday party, you know, in a beautiful dress, having to wear the big Jewish star. Now, here's an interesting way to resist. In France, this young man, he was 15 years old, Maurice Lambert. He said, we make fun. So that they began to have these stars, swing, zazu. They began, even though they were not Jewish, would wear the stars as a protest against what was happening, because the same thing was happening in France, putting Jews in concentration, shipping them to concentration camps. So here was one way that you could resist, to say, I am saying what is happening is not good, it's not appropriate, and we challenge it at this level. It doesn't change the system, but at least it says, do not count me along with others who blindly obey. Oops. So here's an Italian I'm very proud of. He was in Giovanni Bartolucci. He was the chief of police in a small town, but what he did was he destroyed the registry of the town. So you could not tell who were Jews. He saved 5,000 Jews by not turning over the registry to the Nazis, so they couldn't tell who the Jews were, and also he helped Jews escape. So many people in positions of power, there's a famous Japanese, famous Japanese authority who did the same thing. Others who signed documents to pretend Jews were not, so they could cross the border. So you could help. There were ways you could help if you were in a position of power. And some did, most did not. This is a very sad picture. So this is in Holland. And this is Jews being forced to line up to go to the transport. Someone took this picture from the bedroom living room, just took the picture, okay? It didn't help in any way. Didn't go down and say, these are neighbors, so these are people living, didn't go down and give them some food, say, I'm really sorry. Because you could do at least that. You could say, I'm really sorry. I wish I could do something I can't. And the person who said this is, I have to read this. It's, try not to think about it too much, because it only makes you miserable. At this moment, human life does not count for much, especially if it is a Jewish life. So one way you deal with it is denial. You look out, you see this, and you pretend it's just people lining up to go to the movie. So again, the interesting thing is the psychology of the Holocaust. Imagine if you were there, what would you think? What would you do? At some level you say, we would be heroes. No, in the extreme, if you're a hero, you die. But how else could you have helped? And again, how else could people in other nations help? We'll talk about that in a minute. At crucial junctures, every individual makes a decision, and every decision is individual. Okay? Excuse me. So this is a famous picture of Nazi SS officers and their female assistants at an SS resort 18 miles out of Auschwitz. July 1944. Many of these people were involved in processing Jewish deportees who arrived from Auschwitz. So this is the banality of evil. These are people who every day were involved in the killing of Jews in Auschwitz, or making them do slave labor. At a party, they're playing music, they're singing, they're dancing, just ordinary people. Dr. Mengele was was a Jewish officer, I mean, a Nazi officer. He was, when the transports came to Auschwitz, he stood in a row, everybody got out, and when they walked down, he went like this, you go to the right side, or like this, you go to the left side. When you go once like this, you got in a line, and this is for old people, this is for children, this is for people who are frail. Because then they would go to their death immediately. But no one knew. If it goes like this, you go to the slave labor camp because you're young, you're healthy. A friend of mine now, Edie Eger, was 16 years old, from Hungary, from Budapest, was sent there with her mother and her sister. They come together, and Mengele sees the mother, goes like this, the mother goes there. Her sister was very skinny, goes like this. They make her go there. She knows intuitively something is wrong. And so she says, let me try to get my sister, because she always took care of her sister, even though her sister was older. So she was gymnast and ballerina. So she did tumbling, distracted the guards, told her sister, come with me. So the sister went with her. They immediately went into the camp, heads shaved, dresses taken, uniforms put on. She said, where's my mother? The woman said, you see the smoke, that's your mother. So the first thing they did is kill. So here's this Dr. Mengele, who sent people to their death or life. Every Sunday night, he would have a concert in his home in Auschwitz, where Jewish musicians would play, and my friend Edie Eger, as a ballerina, would dance. And when they did that, they got 2 pieces of bread, which helped them survive. So again, here's a monster, but he was a civilized monster. So just like these people are monsters, but they were civilized monsters. Okay. So in the American Museum, the theme is never again. What you do matters. So they're trying to promote the notion that what is a lesson we learn from the Holocaust? Number one, you can never allow it to happen again. And the point is, you could stop it at the beginning. That you can never allow the system to develop, systemic evil, creating those situations. And so you have to realize every person has power, but not power alone. It's collective power. So what you do matters in organizing against evil. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So I was fortunate. I lived in the town of Auschwitz, I can never say this right, Auschwitzium, for 1 week. A few years ago. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish lawyer, and he has a foundation, and his foundation brought a number of psychologists, historians, sociologists to spend a week in Auschwitz camp, Auschwitz city, and then a day in the prison to teach representatives from 20 different non-governmental agencies how to teach about genocide. We gave them books, articles, and things. And part of our experience was visiting the camp. I had to give my lecture in the Auschwitz Museum. But Lemkin was a lawyer, and there was this man who coined the term genocide. Somehow you think it was always there. No, he made up the term, and essentially he promoted international tribunals of justice to say, we put on trial criminals who in their country what they did was acceptable, but it was a crime against humanity. So it doesn't matter if your country says it's okay to kill Jews, or Serbs, or Croatian, or whatever, that there is a higher order, which is a global order where crimes against humanity will be punished. So for me, he should have an important place in Polish history, and I don't, as far as I know, I don't think he gets the full credit he deserves. Okay, lastly, so we were fortunate to meet. So, this is the 50th anniversary of the famous book by Hannah Arendt. in which she promotes the concept of the banality of evil. And if you remember, one of the key phrases she makes is, the trouble with Eichmann. So this was, she was an observer at the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Okay? Eichmann had escaped. They caught, a Jewish underground caught him in Argentina, brought him back, put him on trial. And so she sat through the trial, took notes, and at the end she wrote this book, said, the trouble with Eichmann was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, that they were, and still are, terribly and terrifyingly normal. Think of that. So he and all the others, she said, were terribly, terrifyingly normal. Not in what they did, but the way they appeared. So really what she's saying is, people who did the worst things imaginable look like your Uncle Charlie. They look like your brother. They look like your next door neighbor. The problem is we have in our mind the image of evil from comic books, from movies, of ugly, horrible people. No. People who look just like you could do the things you could not imagine. And therefore, maybe you could too. And she said, from the viewpoint of our legal institutions and our moral standards of judgment, the normality was much more terrifying than the atrocities. She did make a mistake, because she believed Eichmann was, what she said, a leaf in the wind of time, that he was a cog in the machine. No, that's not true. He was one of the architects of the Holocaust, that he hated Jews and was happy that the Holocaust was created. So the banality of evil was just he looked ordinary, but he was not just doing his job. He enjoyed doing his job. So now, quickly, let me present two famous studies with a different perspective. So this is a study on blind obedience to authority, conducted in the 1960s by Stanley Milgram. And as I said, he was a little Jewish boy. We were friends in the same class. And he was concerned, how could people follow the order of someone who told them to do something that went against their conscience? Namely, I want you to harm him. Well, you don't say, I want you to harm him. I say, I want you to help him. Okay. I want you to help him do something good for him, improve his memory. I want you to help him improve his memory because science, psychology, wants to help people. So again, evil always has what they call a cover story, a semantic distortion. And so we say, in fact, I would like you to be a teacher. Teachers are good. He will be your pupil. And here are the rules. When he learns the right thing, you say good, wonderful. But when he says something wrong, you have to punish him. Makes sense. We think punishing errors will make him learn better. So you create a context in which evil makes sense in the ordinary way. The problem is, once you begin to press the button to hurt him, it gets worse and worse, and it looks like this. So, I said before, so Milgram was a Jewish kid worried about the Holocaust, and his study was considered one of the most unethical ever done, because people thought, they didn't really harm the guy, they thought they was hurting someone.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people who are courteous and decent in everyday life can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different, went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience?
So essentially, his study didn't use college students, used mostly men, aged 20 to 50, in two small towns in America, in Connecticut. He did use one group of women, but he tested 1,000 different people. In one way, it's the most representative study in all of psychology, given a large sample. And so when they come, two people come at a time, and he tells one will be a teacher, one will be a learner. The person who's the teacher, he is the innocent person. The one who's going to be the learner is a confederate, works with the experimenter, but pretending to be naive and innocent. So the person who's going to be the learner, they put him in the shock machine, strap him in. So the experimenter is in the white lab coat, gives him the authority. Okay? The other person said, your job is to give the person in the other room, your student, material to learn. And then you give him a test. When he gets it right, you say good in the microphone. When he gets it wrong, you press a button on this shock box. The first button is 15 volts. When you press it, it goes bzz. There's no reaction, too little. And every increment is 15 volts. 15, 30, 45. There's no response. But when you shock 100, he begins to say, hey, it's hurting. 150, he begins to yell and scream. And as you go up, he begins to scream, I quit the experiment, I don't want to do this. Everybody is a good person. People say, I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to be in the experiment. The experiment say, you must. You have a contract. You must continue. So everybody dissents verbally. Say, I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to hurt him. The experiment says, it doesn't matter. You must continue. And so when it gets up to 350 volts, the man in the other room, who you think you're helping, and now you're hurting, screams in this silence. And you say, sir, what's happening? He's not responding. The experiment says it doesn't matter. If he doesn't respond to the scenario, you must continue to shock him. Doesn't make sense. How could you be helping improve his memory if he's unconscious? Doesn't make sense. So at that point, everybody should quit. Paradoxically, at that point, no one quits. Everyone who gets up to 350 volts goes all the way to the end. So the question is, who would go? The end is 450 volts. On the shock box, mild shock, medium shock, strong shock, extreme shock, the last two buttons, XXX, pornography of power. So Milgram described the study to 40 psychiatrists at the Yale Medical School and said, what percent of all American citizens would go to the end, 450 volts? And they said only 1%. Only 1%, because that's sadistic behavior, and only sadists would do it. And we know only 1% of people in every country are psychopaths. In fact, it was 65%. 2 of every 3 citizens, men, and same thing with women, no different, went all the way to the end. The problem was psychiatrists are trained in only analyzing behavior of individuals. So psychiatrists listened and ignored the white lab coat, ignored the roles, teacher, student, ignored the shock box, which was arranged so you go gradually down the slope, 15, 30. They ignored all of that, and they only focused on understanding the individual. This is sadistic behavior, must be done by sadists. Wrong. This is sadistic behavior done by ordinary people. 65% of 1,000 people, young, old, men and women. Social psychologists call this the fundamental attribution error. It means that when we are trying to understand any behavior, how much do we focus on the person and how much do we focus on the situation? The fundamental attribution error says we all overemphasize the importance of the individual and we all minimize the importance of the situation. And in fact, we should always do the opposite. We should always begin by saying, tell me about the situation first, and then tell me about the person in the situation. So So here's the actual data. No one drops out before 285 volts. They're screaming, screaming, screaming. And then 375, one person quits. If you get to 375, then 2 of every 3 go all the way to the end. In quote, this was an experiment that shocked the world. We couldn't believe that human beings, ordinary people, could do this. It has been replicated many times in many different countries with very similar results. And it simply says that we are all trained to be blindly obedient to authority, to our parents, to our priests, to our rabbis, to our bosses, in many cases the old wives to husbands, children to parents, patients to doctors. And sometimes it's good, because sometimes what they do is good for us. But in many cases, authorities are bad. They're unjust, they're inept, what they're doing is wrong. And we don't know how to disobey. No one teaches us how to disobey unjust authority. They teach us how to respect just authority as if there's only that. So we know Catholic priests around the world for 20 years have been abusing children. Thousands of Catholic priests in Ireland and America, other countries, have been raping little children, Catholic priests. And the system knew about it and simply sent the priest to a different parish. No person protected. So here are children who are respecting, if you're Catholic, the Catholic priest, especially if you're Irish Catholic, and now you're being abused. So this could not be more unjust authority. Never was there a child who told, their parents told other priests about this. So this is the curse of being excessively trained to be obedient to authority. So what we have to do is train children how to respect authority that deserves respect, but how to rebel against authority that does not deserve your respect. So Milgram did 16 different experiments, okay? And each of these numbers represents a different variation. I want to point out, so number 13 is women. So this is, what percent of people went 450 volts? So women are 13, 65, same as men. The two most interesting things is, in study 16, you come in, the experiment says, we're late. Please sit down and watch. You see someone like you go all the way to 450 volts. In that condition, 90% of people go all the way. So when you see someone blindly obeying authority, you follow. Can influence people in a positive or negative way, whether we're aware of it or not. That as long as people observe our behavior, if you're a conformist, people will conform. If you're a rebel, most people will do the same. At least 90% difference between being a rebel or being a conformist. So again, I'll show you in a minute of a wonderful interview that our team did with Barack Obama. He says, people have what he calls a ripple effect. That what you do is, except if you do in isolation, but what you do in a social context has a ripple effect. Like when you throw a coin or pebble in a lake, it ripples. And so your ripple effect can be positive or negative, but you always have an effect that you must be aware of. So embarrassing. Okay, one more. So one conclusion I make, all evil in the world begins with 15 volts. What does that mean? It means if you were a subject in that experiment, and you looked at the shock box, and he said, just press 15 volts. You look here, at the end is 450. Why would they make a machine that could go to 450 if they did not expect some people like you to go all the way to the end. So if you look at this, you should say, no, I don't want to begin, because I could go to the extreme. In the same way, they say, no, your job is, not just tell this Jewish person to get on this transport. Do you ask, where is it going? If you don't ask, then you're pressing the 15 volt. So when you press 15 volts, you're on a slippery slope, because 15 is 30, 30 is 45, 45 is 100, 100 is 300, and suddenly you're killing somebody. In the same way with corruption, it always begins by you take a little bit of money, a little bit. Once you take a little bit, then you're doing something illegal, and the person you're taking it knows. They're going to ask you to do more and more extreme things. So very quickly, I followed up 10 years later, 1971 at Stanford. I wanted to see what happens if we have really good people, college students, the best and the brightest. And I'm going to give them personality tests, normal on every dimension. 1971 in America, most students were social activists for civil rights, against the war in Vietnam, against being authoritarian. In our study, we began with a little ad. Wanted male college students for study of prison life. 2 weeks, $15 a day. We did it in the summer when many students had finished summer school and were in the San Francisco area. So these are not Stanford students. We did it at Stanford, in the Stanford psychology department. And when they came, so we put the ad, 75 people answered the ad. They came to my office. We gave them personality tests, interviews. We picked only normal, healthy, best and brightest. So in the Milgram study, he picked anyway. So no, we begin with only good apples, and I'm going to put them in a bad barrel. But then what we did is we flipped the coin, prisoner guard, prisoner guard. So at the beginning, it was no different. Your background was irrelevant to whether you're going to be a prisoner or a guard. But we're going to create a mentality in which, if you're a guard, your role in life is to dominate the other, the prisoner. Now, everybody knew it was an experiment. They had to sign a paper to say, I'm willing to be an experiment for up to 2 weeks. I will be assigned to be a prisoner guard. There'll be minimally adequate diet. There'll be health care provided. And they say, and I can quit any time I say I quit. So everybody knows an experiment. So when we're going to begin, we didn't want them to come and say, I'm here for the experiment. Why? Because if they give up their freedom, they could take it back. So how do you become a prisoner? You become a prisoner because the authorities arrest you, and the only way you get your freedom back is through the authorities. So this is how we began.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
This is Stanford University. It's really beautiful. And to the right, this is the psychology department here. And our prison is going to be downstairs. So what I did is I recruited the real city police to do real arrests of the boys who are going to be prisoners, living in homes or living in dormitories. And this is what the arrests look like. Police car siren, red lights going.
Police car pulls up in front.
Police car pulls up in front.
Cop comes to the front door, knocks, and says he's looking for me. So right there, they know.
So the idea was to surprise them The police pretended it was a real arrest. They say, violation of Penal Code 452, armed robbery, you come with me, you have your right to a lawyer, etc., etc. But they knew they hadn't done it, but everybody feels a little guilty. You cheated, you lied, you did some bad things. So we counted on that little bit of guilt, and then worry about, was this that experiment or not? And then they're down in our dungeon. We strip them naked, we spray them with disinfectant, and then we put them in our uniform, and suddenly we take off the blindfold, and they realize that they are prisoners. So the prisoners became numbers. So they're prisoners, they're rules. We take away your name, your number. So he was 8612, 2013, 1123. You could only refer to each other as numbers. Your name was irrelevant. You had to say to the guards, Mr. Correctional Officer. And there were many, many rules you had to learn over and over again. 9 prisoners and 3 guards. Guards worked 8-hour shifts. So morning, afternoon, evening shift. So guards worked 8 hours, they went home like guards do. Prisoners lived 24 hours a day in tiny little prison cells. Guards had fancy military uniforms, symbols of power, clubs, handcuffs. And then it began with menial push-ups, jumping, physical activities. But when the prisoners rebelled, then the guards had to exercise more power. What it means to be a guard is you have to inform other people, show them they have no power, you have all power. This is true in every power relationship. So prisons are a metaphor of power. So the only more extreme is slave and slave owner. So next to that is prison. But we say it's the same thing in teacher-student, doctor-patient. In any relationship where power is dominant, this is what you see. So again, over time, the guards had prisoners clean out the toilets with their bare hands, do again, more menial things. And then they began to use, it took 3 days, they began to be more sexual humiliation, sexual degradation. Again, as we saw in Abu Ghraib. The boy you saw, who was the first to be arrested, in 36 hours had an emotional breakdown. You'll hear in a minute, screaming, cursing, loss of control. And we had to bring him to student health to release him. He became a model of how you get out. Each day thereafter, another prisoner had a similar emotional breakdown, 5 in 5 days, so we had to end the study at the end of on the 6th day, because it was out of control.
In 1971, Phil Zimbardo conducted a revolutionary experiment here in the bowels of Stanford University in the United States. It rocked the world of psychology. A group of students were divided randomly into prisoners and guards and lived in a makeshift jail. The prisoners immediately became submissive, and the guards became cruel. Within a week, Phil Zimbardo's prison was inhumane, and the experiment had to be cut short.
So again, we ended early because it was out of control. I mean, the guards were doing worse and worse things, and after 4 days, they began to do sexually degrading things to the prisoners, knowing it was an experiment at some level, knowing the boys who were prisoners had not committed a crime. In fact, except for a flip of the coin, they would be wearing the smocks rather than the military uniforms. So when you say, what does it take for ordinary people to do evil? We now have a recipe. We know from many, many experiments, much research in social psychology, cognitive psychology, that here's a recipe. In 1 hour, when I talk to high school students, I could get most of you to do a bad thing, okay? If we can make you feel dehumanized, take away your humanity, make the other an animal, diffuse your responsibility. You're not responsible, the team is. Create an authority system. create unjust system of control, use group pressure, group dynamics, make you feel anonymous. So we have substantial evidence of this, and again, in the Lucifer Effect, I go through all the research that illustrates this. Very quickly now, the power of propaganda. So there's an outstanding book you should know about by, I'm trying to think, he's not a psychologist, he's like a social analyst named Sam Keen. He has a book called Faces of the Enemy. And what he says is every nation in the world uses propaganda to create an image of the enemy that people will hate, and that the children of those people will be trained to kill. So he calls it Faces of the Enemy. And just very quickly, it's like this. This is the enemy, enemy of your God, enemy who's going to rape your women. And so one of the things that people underestimate is the power of propaganda in the Nazi killing machine. Okay. So the Nazis in Berlin in that time were really advanced in terms of photography, in terms of cinematics. And they were able to use this, especially with Goebbels. So the question is, how did the Nazis corrupt first the education system in order to transform blindly obedient students who raised their hand, like in the Milgram study, into mindless masses of Nazi fanatics? Because we want to start with, so they create the illusion of a man who is the Führer, the God. So here's Hitler. They're going to make, the propaganda is going to make him a God. And what they do with Goebbels and others, they put this man in spectacles. All the movies you see, so here's Hitler with tens of thousands of people in a huge amphitheater with banners all around and people marching and people saluting Heil Hitler. So he becomes a god, a charismatic god. And then they create Hitler Jungen. So here's every young child. You see the poster, you want to be like the Führer, and also girls. But that's not enough. You want to imitate how they walk. So you have the group dynamics, these pictures of little boys wanting to be like Nazi warriors. And then they're going to corrupt the educational system. What they're going to do is the Minister of Education, with the aid of some artists, are going to create comic books that every child at different ages had to read. And the comic books were all about the evil Jew and the good Aryan. So you're a little child just learning to read, and this is what you get. In addition, even more insidious, the children had to learn to write by copying the text. So it's not that so it says, the dirty Jew and the good Aryan. So this is one book that they had to read. It's the Jew is like a fox in the woods. And so children had to copy the writing. So essentially they are writing the story. And here's the children actually reading that. And what they see is so here's the good Aryan, and here's the dirty Jew. So you just visually, this is ugly and that's handsome. And then you're writing the story. And this is the rich Jews on Sunday walking in the park, and here's the Aryan boy with no shoes. So you start subtle. You're going to be less subtle. So here's the lecherous Jew trying to seduce an Aryan woman. There's his son, embarrassed. And there's the children here with no shoes. Okay? And here's the Jewish landlady. Here's the dirty Jewish butcher. Here's the Jew eating meat on Sabbath, and the Catholic priest can't believe it. And here's the dirty Jewish landlord evicting old person and, again, Aryan child with no shoes. So imagine your child reading this. So what? What does that lead to? You don't want Jews around. It's okay, it's reasonable, it's acceptable to kick Jews out of your school, to restrict them to ghettos, to turn them away out of your country, and concentrate them someplace. And in fact, all of those books end with pictures like this. Kicking Jews out of your school, which now is reasonable. It's not fanatic. Next picture is, you don't let them into your parks, restrict them. And the next is, you kick them out of your country. So here's, now imagine you're a little Jewish kid and you read this. Those things seem reasonable. Those are natural consequences of everything you know about those people. Okay? And then, as you get older, it's not enough to kick them out because they could come back. You have to isolate them. I'm sorry. But they never said we're killing them. So yeah, we're going to send them to detention centers, camps, and so you get the evil influence away. Remember the sign: Jews are our misfortune. And then after that, it's the final solution. So very quickly now, Act 3. So you ask me, okay, we know how to get good people to turn evil. Okay? How do we get ordinary people to be heroes? The answer is, we don't know. How come? There is no research on heroism. How could that be? The word hero and heroism does not exist in any psychology textbook. Okay? I think in my new core concept I first introduced, hero and heroism does not exist in the positive psychology movement. The positive psychology movement is about human virtue, compassion, empathy, sympathy. Heroism is an action, it's not a virtue, according to them. According to me, compassion and empathy without heroism is nice, but it doesn't change evil. Okay? So we don't know. There's almost no research on heroism. The main research is really about Christians who help Jews. And that was interview research 20, 30 years after the Holocaust. So there's no experimental research on heroism. There's really very little ongoing research. So I started a foundation in America, I'll tell you about briefly, where we want to understand. We want to do research. We want to get money to support research in every country on understanding the nature of heroism. So I come up with the concept of the opposite of Hannah Arendt, the banality of heroism. Heroes are ordinary people. They stand up, they speak out, and they take action against injustice and inhumanity of all kind by developing the moral courage to transform the private virtue of compassion into the civic virtue of heroic action. And they do it knowing there's a cost, a consequence of their behavior. Heroes could die, as many of them did in the Holocaust. Heroes could lose their job when you expose corruption or fraud. So the banality of heroes is that most heroes are ordinary people. The problem is what? The problem is in our literature, who are the heroes? Agamemnon, Achilles, samurai warriors, male killers. That's really in our history. All the people you see around Warsaw, these guys on horses, are there because they killed. And it's only men. We now know, and I'll give you the wonderful example in a moment of Ireny Sendlerowej, most women who are heroes do it forming a network. Because in the Holocaust, you couldn't be a solitary hero. You had to move the children from place to place. And women are used to working in networks. Men are used to working alone. And I'm going to argue in a minute, what you have to do is learn how to work in networks. This is true. Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, the whole civil rights movement in America was all about forming heroic networks.
You know, what's remarkable about history is ordinary people doing extraordinary things. You know, last year Rosa Parks passed away. And you know, I remember sitting on this stage with world leaders, Bill Clinton and senators and governors, and thinking we were all paying homage to a seamstress who had transformed the country and helped transform the world. You know, we never know sort of how our actions are going to ripple over time. But each of us can take some responsibility for making sure that we are pushing a little bit in the direction of justice, in the direction of equality, in the direction of tolerance. And when we do that, we may surprise ourselves with the amount of influence that in fact we have just by standing up or speaking up.
So again, so he represents my definition of banality of heroism. If you stand up, if you speak out against injustice and intolerance, you can have a ripple effect. You could do it as one person. If you do it right, you can persuade other people. It's better if you begin by just having people join you in a social movement. So this is Rosa Parks. She was a woman who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. She was a seamstress. She made dresses for rich white women, okay? And one day, when she got on a bus, black people had to sit in the back of the bus. There was a sign, black people, colored people, they called them. And she said, no, I don't want to go, I don't want to sit there. It's not right. I paid the same money as everybody else. They put her in prison. They gave her a prison number. She was a prisoner. I don't know if I have that picture. But this mobilized the black civil rights movement against segregation in public transportation. This is, what, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago. In America, black people could not ride on the bus with white people, a train. They had to sit in a separate section. This is, again, in a democracy. And so she started the movement, and then many people around the country, you know, became a political movement, and now all buses and trains and airplanes are desegregated. So what are the enemies of heroism? Obviously evil, immorality, indifference, you don't care, egocentrism, it's about me, being cynical, being pessimistic, ignorance, and again, blind obedience to authority. So we oppose them with what? With moral courage, with empathy, with compassion. Heroes are sociocentric, meaning heroes focus on the other. In order for me to help you, I have to notice you need help. I have to ask you, are you okay? I have to notice somebody is lying in the corner. Even if I'm giving a talk, I stop. I say, are you okay? Somebody should help her. So heroes are not the egocentric of the heroes of literature, of Agamemnon, Achilles. Heroes live their life focusing on the other and always think, what could I do to make other people feel special? But also, we want you to be a wise hero. So we're going to teach you what is the knowledge, what are the strategies and tactics to be a wise and effective hero. And again, it's righteous defiance against injustice. So that when I see injustice, I am mobilized to take action. Again, either individually or collectively. So we say, you start with small steps. Ask questions. Understand the situation. Always challenge the rules. They say, you must do this. Why? I say, it's a rule. Who made the rule? Nobody knows. Why do I have to sit here rather than there? It's a rule. So again, you challenge the rule, make them answer why the rule. Don't blindly obey authority. Practice mindful disobedience. You do it in a respectful way. And you ask, what is your ripple effect? Your actions and inactions make a difference and have an impact on others. In our training, we say, your job, every day this week, make someone feel special. How do you do that? Give them a compliment. Look them in the eye. Shake hands. Say, how are you? Know their name. compliments begin with external things. So it's easy for women, because they usually have jewelry, so you say, gee, those are beautiful earrings. I don't care about her earrings. I say, they really make you look even more beautiful. So that's a compliment to her. It means I think she has good taste, but that's a start. You start with the external thing, jewelry, accoutrements, how your hair is dressed, but then you want to make it personal. You know, if I know you better, I say, I really like what you said. Today I did an interview. At the end, I told the interviewer, this is so stimulating. It was such an interesting interview. He had a whole set of questions. I said, you must have taken a lot of time. I am honored to do this kind of interview, because many interviews are just boring. He was a famous interviewer. He was really, no one ever compliments the interviewer. So, but for me it was justifiable, but now it's what I do as a habit. So what we're trying to train people to do is develop the social habits of heroism. What are the little things you do every day that make other people feel special? Because in part of it means I'm focused on you rather than on me. Okay? So every place you go, you want to be the host of the party. Your job is to make people feel happy and effective. Just a few more things. So, just very quickly, we go back to the Jewish thing. So we know the two iconic events in ancient Jewish history is Masada, where ancient Jews were protesting Roman rule, and they were in siege in this mountain in Masada for many, many months, and at some point they realized they could not survive. And collectively they made the decision to die with dignity. And now every Israeli soldier has to go to Masada to make the oath, and the oath is, Masada shall never fall again. The equivalent is, for me, the Warsaw Rebellion, where the tragic fate of hundreds of courageous Jewish rebels against Nazi evil. For me, my equivalent is to say, no Jewish ghetto will ever rise again in Poland or anywhere else. So that's, for me, that's an important equivalent that we should realize. Old history and new history. So these are the names some of you obviously know. Some of the young Warsaw rebels. Simcha Rotem was 15 years old. Because he didn't look Jewish, they could send him out to get information, to get food, to get resources. So the lessons to be learned from the Warsaw Rebellion, as we began, for the new generation of Polish heroes. Whoops. I think my finger is too fat for this little thing. So the heroes of 19 April 1943, Warsaw Ghetto, were mostly young men and women who transformed the moral courage into righteous defiance of unjust authority. They were willing to die with honor and dignity rather than to continue living in a fearful, impoverished existence created by the Nazi killing machine. So today's enemies of justice, fairness, honesty, integrity, basic humanity are many. They're everywhere. Only they don't wear Nazi uniforms. They have different disguises. Some of them are teachers. Some of them are business people. Some of them are politicians. But we must try to understand, who are they? Who are those enemies that don't look different? That's the banality of evil. And how do we oppose them? Individually, but again, more important, how do we oppose them collectively? Wherever they exist, in every city, in every nation. And the problem that many Polish people have is that for centuries you have external enemies that some heroes stood up and fought. The problem with Poland is no more external enemies, but they're internal enemies. Who are the internal enemies? It's corruption, it's fraud, it's bullying, it's discrimination. Every nation has those. So those are the enemies of heroism in every nation in the world. So Poland doesn't need the Nazis or the Russians or barbarians or whatever. They're enemies that need to be fought in this country, as in America, as everywhere. But it's not obvious because they don't wear the uniform. They don't have the salutes. So everyday heroism, I believe, can be taught, can be practiced, can be put into action by ordinary people. We begin in our lesson to say every one of us has an inner hero. In many cases, that inner hero has been suppressed because you're black, because you're Jewish, because you're a woman, because you're poor. But if you choose, we can help you express it. It's your choice. But you have it there. There's something special about every human being that wants courage, that wants fairness, that wants honesty. And when we work together, we as the teacher, you as the student, and ultimately you as the student of the teacher of other students, because our program is always having students teach other students, you can be an effective hero creating a social network. So for me, it's now time for Poland to create that new generation of Polish heroes. We respect the heroes of the past, but they're dead. We honor the dead, but now we use their message, their vibrancy to build on a new generation of Polish heroes. But it's not easy. Why not easy? So this is Superman telling his son, it's not enough to fly all around every day, you have to fight evil. To be a hero, you must take action. So what we do is, I created a group called the Heroic Imagination Project, HIP. Okay? So we give Superman a toolkit. We give them lessons to learn how to be wise and effective hero. We created an organization in San Francisco, and we think we can work. We're now training people in Hong Kong, and I think one group in Sweden, but hopefully, for me, I want it to be in Poland, because obviously I love Poland. And this is the guy. This is an actual picture where everybody is saluting. One guy says, no, I don't do it. Okay? So how do you be that guy? How do you change your perspective? Instead of focusing on me and I focused on we and us. Okay? So how can I convince you to be my hero by doing little things every day? The question is, what will you do? Now, the problem with Polish people is two things. Because the Nazi oppression for 10 years, the Soviet oppression in some ways was even worse, not as brutal but more insidious. Whole generations, all the elders here have grown up with a time perspective of focusing on the negative, and nothing you do made a difference. So you have people who live in a past negative and plus what I call present fatalism. Those two time zones in your mind are the enemies of heroism, because then you can't do anything. People who are impulsive, reactive heroes are present hedonists. So they see something, they act right away. I think I have an example in a moment. People who are reflective, proactive heroes, whistleblowers, have to be future-oriented. So how can we begin to train the next generation of Polish students to be more, have a balanced time perspective? In the moment, you focus on the moment, being present-oriented. You think of what are the good things from the past, but always idea of what can I do now that will have a positive consequence in the future. We call that a balanced time perspective, and that's what I proposed in my book, The Time Paradox, that some of you have read. The other problem is the problem I mentioned earlier. For many Polish people, they need an external enemy. Okay? Now the problem is you don't have. And in many cases, you're making the other political party your enemy rather than adversary. Rather than say we work together to make a better Poland, once it becomes your enemy, you want to destroy your enemy by nature. So the question, how do you change that orientation to say, you know, the enemies of Poland, of Warsaw, are the one, it's corruption, it's fraud, it's dishonesty, it's not the people in the other political party. Again, too many Polish people I meet don't smile. Don't smile. Especially, I notice when I come back from, Americans, but when I come back from Sicily where people are, buongiorno, ciao, buonasera, buonanotte, everybody's kissing, everybody's hugging, and people in Poland in the extreme don't smile, okay? Don't make eye contact, don't shake, don't hug. They give a kiss, not a real kiss. There's a pessimistic, cynical orientation. The orientation is can be done. If it hasn't been done, it can't be done. No, no, no. The orientation has to be optimistic. If it can't be done, we could do it for the first time, then we get credit. So doing a new thing is wonderful because then you get credit. Oh, you're creative, okay? So we need to be a hero. We need to be able to challenge the old way of thinking, to be optimistic that anyone can make a difference. Anyone can make a difference, especially if you get other people to join in your movement. So how can that be changed? So I have created this organization, Heroic Imagination Project, HIP. I would love you to go on the website, heroicimagination.org. Again, we're very poor. We only have a few people working with us. I mortgage my house to pay the rent for the organization. We're trying to get funding from Poland, from everywhere, because what we're doing is teaching ordinary people how to stand up, speak out in challenging situations. Sometimes in your family, in your school, in your business, in your community, and then in your nation. So it's you define what is the problem that needs fixing. Get other people to agree, so it's not egocentric, that yes, we all agree this is wrong. And then you decide, how do we oppose injustice in an effective way? So the question is, how do we get, this is from Shakatari magazine, how do you discover the hero in yourself? And in that discovery, to share that hero. Same thing we say, the slippery slope of evil, we want the positive slope, slippery slope, of evil, the positive slope of heroism. You do a good deed, it gets magnified. You give a compliment, you make somebody feel happy. It goes forward. She then is more likely to give somebody else a compliment. And we create a whole new environment, a whole new social movement. And with that, the question is, can we work together to create a new generation of heroes in your school, in your business, in your community, throughout Poland and throughout the world? And I think it is possible if we take an optimistic orientation to say anything is possible if you have people of goodwill, have the energy to work together to say, we will make it happen. And with that, I say I love you. Good night.
Questions, but it's already late, so I think 10 minutes for questions. Proszę Państwa, 10 minut na pytania. Zapraszam tych Państwa, którzy jeszcze nie wykorzystali tego momentu przed wykładem, kiedy wpuszczaliśmy i nie zgłosili się do profesora po podpisaniu książki. Będzie to też można jeszcze zrobić po pytaniach. Książki są dostępne na stoliku przed salą audytoryjną, a teraz zapraszam do zadawania pytań. Ktoś z Państwa ma pytanie?
And then we sign books.
Dzień dobry, Magdalena Czyż. Panie profesorze, jest Pan psychologiem, więc poproszę o poradę psychologiczną. Jakieś 2 tygodnie temu zobaczyłam, jak na swoim osiedlu, jak facet katuje swojego psa. Kopie go i rzuca nim o ziemię. Zareagowałam, zaczęłam na niego wrzeszczeć. Zgłosiłam to, akurat patrol policji się pojawił, więc zgłosiłam to na policję. Nie ukrywam, że wybucham. Zagotowałam się, jak zobaczyłam, jak ten facet katuje swojego psa. I kiedy się to już skończyło, wróciłam do domu, odczuwałam wstyd z powodu swojego wybuchu. Proszę mi powiedzieć, dlaczego się wstydzę?
Oh, wait, that's 2 different questions. So you almost did the right thing. You saw something that was injustice, and you took action. The problem is you took it the wrong way. So that was not a wise action. I would have said to the man, why are you doing this? So I would try to shame him. So the problem is if you are impulsive, you overreact. Maybe you started cursing or yelling or something, and then you created an irrelevant situation. So essentially, it's to understand, you know, what is your orientation. So if you think it is wrong for animals to be hurt, then it is the right thing to do to challenge it. So I'm saying, so the way to do it is you say, why are you doing this? So that automatically makes him stop, and he has to give you a reason, and you say, no, then you have to say, it's wrong. You should not do this. And if you don't stop, I will report you to the authorities. So you give them an option, and you assume he would stop. It's no different than you're in a supermarket and you see some woman slapping a child around. You assume it's the mother, but it doesn't have to be. You assume the child must have done something bad, but still you should say, why are you doing that? So what we try to train people to do is how to keep your composure, because what you want to do is change the situation. You don't want people to be angry at you, because then you deflect the anger at the dog, the anger at the child to you. And you simply say, why are you doing that? I wish you wouldn't. It's not right to the child. Even if the child did something bad, it's not right to humiliate your child in public. And then always you say, please stop. If they don't want to stop, you say, I will call the authorities. I will call the police. And so you have an option. If you don't stop, then I will use my option as a citizen to report you to the police. So I think, so for me, that's a more courageous way of taking the heroic action. But it's wonderful that you did that, at least, because most people would look the other way. I didn't have a chance to talk about the biggest enemy of heroism is bystander apathy. You see something terrible, okay? And you look the other way. So one kind of evil is the evil of inaction. You don't do something right when other people are not doing it. So you do nothing. So doing nothing when you should do something is evil, as in some way as bad as doing the wrong thing. I didn't show you because we didn't have enough, because I was talking too long. We did demonstration in London. We had people lying on the steps of Liverpool station, lying, you know, like this, clearly something wrong. And then we photographed people passing. We had a clock. We had a woman, nicely dressed, lying on the steps. In 5 minutes, 35 people passed right by, and no one stopped to help. So the problem is, when you're in a situation with a lot of people, the paradox is, the more people there are, the less likely anyone is to help. Because the social norm is, do nothing. But when one person stops, then immediately other people join in. What's the message? Do something. Be the one. Take the action. So again, we know from lots of research around the world, whenever you're in a situation where somebody needs help, and there are many people and they don't help, it prevents you from taking action. So that's where you have to say, no, I will do the heroic thing, I will help. So in this case, so people don't help where there's danger. There's no danger. A woman's lying. It's not like you're running into helping somebody in a burning fire. So there's no danger to you, but it's just socially socially awkward. Nobody is helping, why should I help? The hero mentality is, I always help. I don't have to go, I could call the police. I could say, do you need help? I could say, the woman in the blue needs help. Could you with the pretty earring? Could you with the green jacket? So instead of saying help, I identify, I individuate you to say, could you? Could you? And they always do it. So people are good if you encourage them to be good, to be moral. But when you say, somebody help, you look around, nobody's answering, you go out.